Good evening, all. As I've told you, there has never been a film adaptation of Philip K. Dick's very strange novel, The Three Stigmata of Palmer Eldritch, which was one of my favorites. But there is a movie that's very close in both theme and style, and that is David Cronenberg's excellent 1999 science fiction movie, ExistenZ. As with most of David Cronenberg's works, there's a little bit of body horror in this movie, so it's a science fiction slash horror film. The horror elements are really very light in this. It's not a horror movie. It's really a science fiction movie and very intellectual and very good. Unfortunately, it came out around the same time as The Matrix, and it was poorly compared. And I don't think that's a fair comparison. Actually, I quite like ExistenZ much more than The Matrix, which I thought was dumb, quite frankly. The idea of humans being used as batteries is stupid. We generate very little electricity in our bodies. That whole story that you've heard about, oh, there are people who can't wear watches, that's bullshit. There's no such thing. It's wives' tales. But anyway, I don't want to talk about The Matrix. I want to talk about ExistenZ. As I said, it was directed by David Cronenberg, and he wrote, produced, and directed the movie. Notably, it stars Jennifer Jason Leigh as a character called Allegra Geller, who's a virtual reality programmer who has created a program called ExistenZ. That's ExistenZ with the Z capitalized. Jude Law plays a security guard called Ted Peichel. Ian Holm plays a very duplicitous character called Carl Vonnecker. Don McKellar plays another duplicitous character, Yevgeny Nourish. Keith Rennie plays Hugh Carlow, who's sort of a marginal character. Sarah Polley plays a character just called Merrill. Robert Silverman plays a character called Darcy Norris. And Christopher Eccleston plays the seminar leader. And Willem Dafoe plays a character called Gas, who's a very interesting character. Notably, the cinematography was by the great Peter Suchitsky, who you may know from a little movie called The Rocky Horror Picture Show, and also a number of other excellent movies, also Listomania, The Empire Strikes Back, Krull, Naked Lunch, Mars Attacks, M. Butterfly, and a lot of other. He worked with David Cronenberg quite a lot. A lot of other movies and TV series as well. A really excellent cinematographer. British, but member of the American Society of Cinematographers. The movie was very well received. It didn't make a lot of money. I believe it cost $2.5 million, and it only made about $5 million back. Probably because came out, the timing was just bad. It came out too close to The Matrix, and people liked The Matrix because it was big budget. And this movie was lower budget. It's not low budget. There are some actually really good special effects. In fact, Roger Ebert said that compared to The Matrix, he liked the special effects in ExistenZ better. And he thought the story was stranger as well, which it is. How it resonates with the Three Stigmata of Palmer Eldritch and its origin story, The Days of Perky Pat, is as follows. Without going over it completely, the basic principle of the Three Stigmata of Palmer Eldritch is that there is a future in which colonists on distant worlds are kept entertained by a drug called CAN-D, and that's CAN-D, which allows them to enter a fictional world where they become this character, Perky Pat, a sort of a Barbie-like character, and they can actually live in this world through the use of this drug because they're very bored, their lives are really kind of miserable. And then, to their chagrin, the main character, Barney Mayerson, is a precognitive, and he works in the precognitive fashion department of Perky Pat Layouts, which produces these layouts that the colonists use. And he has to predict things like what's the next fashion going to be, and then produce it for them. And that's how he makes his living. Well, and the company's run by this sort of a megalomaniac character named Leo Bolero. Well, much to Leo Bolero's chagrin, this character named Palmer Eldritch, who went out to Pluto, comes back and says, I've got something better than CAN-D. It's called CHEW-Z, and it's CHEW-Z. And with this, you don't need the physical Perky Pat layout. In fact, you don't need Perky Pat at all. It's injectable. Once you take it, you can create any world you want. You don't have to, it doesn't have to be Perky Pat, it can be anything you imagine. Well, that turns out to be a little bit of a lie. It turns out that when you do take this substance, Chu Z, the person who's controlling your reality is actually Palmer Eldritch himself. There's a whole question in sort of the back of the novel as to whether what came back or who came back from Pluto is actually Palmer Eldritch or some sort of alien who took him over. And then it starts getting into the questions of, the kind of big questions that Dick liked to ask, like, what is reality? Is there really such a thing as shared reality? What if you're not in control of the reality all around you? What if somebody else is? And those questions are also asked in ExistenZ. ExistenZ revolves around a character, the character played by Jennifer Jason Leigh, called Allegra Geller. And she is a virtual reality programmer. In the future, it's supposed to be 2030. They use these things called biopods, which are sort of living game entities. It looks kind of like an organ out of someone's body. And people plug into quote unquote bioports, which are actually implanted into their spinal column. And they plug in sort of like an umbilical cord to this game. They call them umbicord, so it is basically an umbilical cord. And Geller has created a new game called ExistenZ, which she wants to try out. And the first scenes we see, there are two companies that create these things. There's Antenna Corporation, which Geller works for, and another corporation that's a competitor called Cortical Systems. And there are also a third group called quote-unquote realists who oppose the use of virtual reality at all. They say it's corrupting people and corrupting their idea of what reality is, and that they're against these things. Well, Allegra Geller is holding a seminar where she's going to introduce this new game of hers, ExistenZ. And the seminar leader is played by Christopher Eccleston, yes, the Ninth Doctor. And all of a sudden, one of these realists bursts in and shoots her. Well, she's injured but not killed. She's saved by this character, Ted Pikel, played by Jude Law. And he drags her out. Her game port has been damaged, and she's worried that the copy of ExistenZ that she carries inside her has been damaged as well, or corrupted. Well, they go to her mountain cabin, and Ted Pikel reveals that he does not have a bioport. And she says, well, how can you help me if you don't have a bioport? I know somebody who can give you one. She takes him to this character called Gas, who's played by Willem Dafoe, who it turns out is a rather sleazy character who installs a bioport in Ted's spine. And it turns out that bioport is deliberately corrupted because he wants to corrupt the version of ExistenZ that she has, because he's working for Cortical Systems, the enemy, as it were. And a number of things. Again, I'm not going to describe the entire movie for you, because if you haven't seen it, it's well worth watching. There's a lot of kind of strange stuff. Roger Ebert said there's quote-unquote gooey, indescribable organic things in the movie. I think that's kind of an apt description. How this, again, the way that this ties in with the three stigmata is both subtle and not so subtle. Again, as I said, the themes are almost identical. And there's a scene where, while they're trapped in this mountain cabin trying to figure things out, Pikel and Allegra Geller are eating some fast food. And when you look at the fast food boxes, the name of the fast food company is Perky Pat's. Well, Perky Pat was this doll who was supposed to be like Barbie. In the original story, which was much different, there were these colonists who lived in or not colonists, there were survivors of a nuclear war who lived in what are called fluke pits. Fluke being a fluke that they survived. And they also play this game of Perky Pat, and they're dropped care packages by these strange creatures called Martian care boys, which are described as sort of like being like giant centipedes, but they're intelligent and they care about people. That's why they're called care boys. And they're supposed to be using these things they give them to rebuild society, but instead they're wasting time playing this game of Perky Pat, where they do things like, instead of building radios from the components they're given, they build like a working lawnmower for their Perky Pat layout. Somebody says, I got a lawnmower. Somebody else says, I got a working air conditioner. So they're competing. Well, they come up against, this is the San Francisco fluke pit, and they come up against another fluke pit, which I think is the San Rafael fluke pit. And they have a different doll called Connie Companion. And Their version is much more mature. Her boyfriend has a job, and she can get pregnant, and they have like serious things that go on, and they challenge them. They say, we'll play a game with you, and whoever wins the game gets to keep all the layouts. And the San Franciscos are very proud, and they say, "Oh yeah, okay, fine, we'll play it." Well, it turns out that they lose, and so they lose everything. They lose Perky Pat and her boyfriend Walt, and all the layouts that they spent all this time building. Meanwhile, their children are actually kind of disgusted with the fact that their parents are living in this fantasy world, and they want to actually rebuild the world. And that's the end of that story. Things work out in somewhat similar fashion in this movie. Again, like I said, I'm not going to spoil anything. There's a number of twists and surprises, strange things that goes on. It turns out that there's a game that's sort of independent. In the end, you find out that's called ExistenZ, which is supposed to be superior to ExistenZ, and the people who thought Geller and Pike go through this whole series of adventures. There's betrayals and there's murder, and there's these corrupt ports, and it turns out that Peichel actually turns out to be a realist, and he was just hired to try to kill Allegra, and she knew this and planted a bomb in his bioport. His bioport explodes and kills him. But then they wake up and they're not dead. They're in a church, and they're all wearing virtual reality helmets, and they've been playing not ExistenZ but ExistenZ. They don't like that there were a lot of anti-game elements in the game, and they're against it, and they start shouting, death to ExistenZ. They start killing everybody in the room. And finally, this one character who had played a Chinese waiter in the game that they played says, "Are you still in the game?" And they just look at each other blankly. They don't know. And that is very similar to the ending of The Three Stigmata of Palmer Eldritch, which obviously Cronenberg is a fan of. In the ending of that novel, Leo Bolero allegedly has defeated Palmer Eldritch, and he even sees a statue of himself that says, he's the person who defeated a quote-unquote enemy of the Sol system, and he's rushing back to Earth to kind of spread the news. But as he's going back, we realize that he possesses these three stigmata, which are a metal eye, robotic eye, I should say, a metal hand, and steel teeth. And he sees somebody with these three stigmata, and you start to question, wait a minute, did this really happen, or is he just imagining? Is Palmer Eldritch still in control of everything? And we don't know. And the same thing happens in ExistenZ. We don't know. Again, highly recommend it. I like it a lot better than I like both this movie and The 13th Floor better than The Matrix. They're both much more intelligent and intellectual and better written and produced and directed too. So I recommend especially this movie, ExistenZ, over those two movies.